to a third country is downright immoral. And to immorality, we can also add absurdity, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Seeking to legislate by assertion that Rwanda is safe is as ridiculous as it is dangerous. You can't sign a quick treaty one week and then legislate the next to make a country safe when the highest court in the land has said just the opposite. It is the facts on the ground that matter. It feels bizarre to have to say it, but apparently it is necessary to, and that is that legislation to say Parliament believes something to be true does not make it so. Fixing the facts on which the law is to be applied is the kind of thinking that dangerous conspiracies are based on. As Tom Hickman, KC, has said in a paper for the Institute of Government, and I quote, "If the government considers that the treaty has eliminated the real risk of refoulement, then it should seek to persuade the courts of that, not Parliament. It should not need saying that when you sign a treaty, you should stick to it. The UK government now has the embarrassment of being schooled by the Rwandan government, who, despite its own poor human rights record, is now sending out warning shots that even they will pull out of this shoddy deal if the UK government breaches international law to implement it." Mr. Deputy Speaker, I will be voting against this bill tonight because there's no tweak or amendment that can improve something that is rotten to its core. The bill before us today is a doomed and draconian attempt to reassert the Prime Minister's fragile claim to a non-existent authority, but it has serious consequences and sets an extremely dangerous precedent. These are deeply dangerous times in this country, and they are made more dangerous by this government. We've already seen the suppression of the rights to strike, the right to protest, and other democratic principles and standards being seriously eroded. Now we have this flagrant attack on human rights, on our courts, and on the separation of powers in this country. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I call upon this government to abandon its cruel, immoral and unworkable Rwanda plan and to re-establish the UK's good standing as a member of the ECHR and international community.
Well said.
Simon Felt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll start by saying very simply that I'm not a massive fan of this policy. I don't suspect that's a great surprise to the former Home Secretary or indeed the former Immigration Minister. But nonetheless, I do think it is crucially important. We need a deterrence policy. Whether we have a workable one or not is what sits at the heart of this debate. As a member of the Home Affairs Committee, we've heard the message time and time again, whether it's from law enforcement, from officials on the front line, from ministers, from our friends and neighbours in Europe, that deterrence has to work hand in hand with a fair asylum system. The idea that the solution to this is simply opening up more safe and legal routes is for the birds. We need them, of course, but we also need a hard deterrence to prevent abuse of our asylum system. When this policy was first announced, French officials said to us on the committee that there was a spike in asylum claims in France because people feared what would happen to them if they made that irregular boat journey to France and ended up in another country. When the planes failed to take off, the spike in claims levelled off. We've been to the beaches in Calais, we've spoken to asylum seekers in the camps near the coast, and as a committee we've spoken to our compatriots in Europe. It is very clear that countries across Europe, indeed across the globe, are casting around for a solution that we all face, for a challenge that we all face, Millions of people are on the move due to the effects of climate change and war, and we are not on our own here. And I gently suggest to friends and colleagues across this chamber who think that this is the government tilting at a particularly British windmill, that we are not. Versions of this scheme are being worked up across Europe, across the world. We need a rational asylum system, one that extends to help beyond schemes to Hong Kong residents, to people from Ukraine, Afghanistan and Syria, the schemes that we should be rightly proud of. We need one that extends to people who need genuine help. We need to erode our asylum backlog, and I give full credit to my right honourable friend for the work he put in doing just that. We need to place more work into inculcating citizenship for those who come here. We also need a sensible discussion on legal migration, being proud of the people who want to come and live and work here, set up their families here, and only tapering off numbers once we've geared the system enough to grow our own, not least to support agriculture, tourism, fisheries and social care, and avoiding cliff edges. But I go back to the main point. We do also need a deterrent. One that stands up and says to the criminal gangs and the people traffickers that their trade will not work. That they can try and put people on boats across the channel, but those boats will be intercepted and that their journey will not end in Britain. Doing that will break the trade. Doing that will make the boats unviable. And it's a goal that we share across this chamber. The key issue that the Supreme Court raised was whether Rwanda was considered to be a safe country in processing asylum claims, and whether individuals sent there were at risk of refoulement. The court argued that they're at risk. The measures in the new treaty, including independent monitoring and the new appeals body, with the Commonwealth National Co-President, should put these concerns to bed. The belt and braces approach that the government is taking is proportionate and consistent with the rule of law, going so far as it can, but no further within the bounds of our international treaty obligations. Not my words, but Lord Wolfson's words. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I may dislike this policy and indeed the reality of where we find ourselves, but voting for this measure is the best route to stopping the boats, to saving lives, and to crushing the business model of the criminal gangs who are exploiting some of the most vulnerable people in the world. I will be supporting this bill tonight.
Thank you very much. Tommy Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I have been in this House on many occasions now when we have discussed migration, and it saddens me that every time we do so, the narrative from this side of the House is invariably negative and pejorative. Immigration is always couched as a problem to be dealt with rather than an opportunity to be embraced. And I long for the day when we can have a positive discussion about the fact that almost everywhere in history where people have moved from one country to another, it has been to the benefit of the country to which they go. And we can also have a positive discussion about fulfilling our international and humanitarian obligations to people seeking sanctuary in this world, particularly since the 200 years of imperial history of this country was, and it gives us a very great responsibility to many of those problems.
Well said.
And it saddens me, some of the remarks, he's not in his place, but the member for New York, I think, will come to regret some of the things he said when he talks about immigration being this great scourge and tries to suggest that any alternative to what he is suggesting will result in a tenfold increase in boats coming across the Channel. This is an attempt to weaponise and politicise a very sensitive subject for political gain, and it is, I think, very distressing indeed. If there is a problem with migration policy in this country, then it is a problem that is made by this Conservative government. Let me give 3 examples. The first would be the backlog, which rose to a shocking level of almost 100,000 people waiting to have their applications determined. That was a simple management failure of not deploying enough resources to do the job that was in front of them. Incontrovertible, in my view, that statement, because the evidence is there that when they did employ more people and more caseworkers, the numbers turned and began to come down. And today they have 2,500 caseworkers working on these cases and processing these claims. The money that they have already spent in this expensive Rwanda gimmick would pay for 3 times that number of caseworkers. Imagine what could be done with that capacity in dealing with this problem. The second thing is the hotels. I know, I agree. Everybody agrees that this is completely unsatisfactory, that people who claim asylum in this country and want to make their case should be locked away for months on end in hotel accommodation that is not fit for their needs. It is a problem for the communities in which those hotels are located. It's also a problem for the people who are forced to be in that substandard and inadequate accommodation while their claims are processed. But it's a choice by the government to treat these people as guilty until proven innocent and to detain them in this way. An alternative way of doing it would be to look at a claim, and if a determination is made that it cannot be assessed within a number of days, then a temporary permit is granted to that applicant to allow them to remain in the country and to work whilst they are here. Now, what would happen? What would happen if that were the case? Well, what would happen is, first of all, the hotel bill would disappear, but more than that, people would seek the support of their families and friends and communities already in this country and of funded voluntary organisations at a much lesser cost to the taxpayer than is currently the case. And more than that, they would start doing work and paying tax in this country. And it's been suggested to me that if you did that, of course, well, people would just fall through the system because you wouldn't be able to control them. Well, I put it to the Home Office. There are 90,000 records you have already lost. So if people are allowed to work, I rather fear that the HMRC system might be rather better at us knowing where they are than the current regime which is there. And then the boats. People talk about disrupting the business plan. The business plan of the traffickers who use the boats was gifted to them by this government because you closed down the legal routes to come to this country, opening up these business opportunities. And the best way to get rid of them, would be to make sure that there is a system in place where anyone who wishes to apply for asylum in this country can do so, and their application is determined if efficaciously and swiftly a judgment is made, and it is either denied or they are accepted. And yet we talk about this as if everyone coming here in these boats was illegal and undeserving. Even on the latest figures, 3/4 of those applicants have been granted asylum because they have a legitimate claim. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, on the Rwanda policy itself, I've referred to it as a gimmick, but let me just, in the seconds remaining, let me just deal with this point about deterrence. We know that the Rwanda scheme is going to make an infinitesimal contribution to this problem. We talk about maybe 100, maybe 200 places being available in Rwanda that people can be deported to. In the crossings over the Channel in recent years, 300 people have died in making that journey. Will someone please tell me, if people are prepared to make this very dangerous journey, in spite of the risk of death, why would they stop making it because of the much lesser risk of being deported to Rwanda? The truth is, these people have a right to come and apply to be here. They have a need to do it, and if we were humanitarian at all, we would respect that.
Natalie Elphicke.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. As the Member of Parliament for Dover and Deal, the small boats are of particular concern because it is my constituency in which these boats arrive, and Dover is in a very real sense on the front line of this crisis. And it is on the shores of the English Channel that I have stood too often in sadness for the many lives that have been lost, unnecessary lives lost, because each and every person was safe already in France. In a very real sense, if we stop the boats, we save lives. And we don't just save lives, we cut crime and we put a stop to the criminal gangs who smuggle people. And that brings me to the key question that's before the House today. Will this bill stop the boats? What we know is that it is clear from the recent Supreme Court's judgment that they do not think that Rwanda is acceptable. And I fear that this bill in its current form will not change that position, not least because the Supreme Court was so emphatic in the tone of their decision. And it certainly won't in the next few months, as my right honourable friend, the member for Newark, so clearly and passionately expressed. Now, we have made substantial progress this year in reducing the number of small boat arrivals, and I thank him for the work that he and this government have done on that. Because it is the case that it's diplomacy that can sometimes succeed when all else fails. And that was the experience when it came to stopping the lorry smuggling. Under Lord Cameron, extraordinary arrangements were made with France to take joint action to stop the lorries then, just as we need to stop the boats now. Then it was said that no deal could be done, and yet it was. That's why, following the Supreme Court judgment, we must turn to diplomacy once again with a cross-channel agreement to return people to France rather than Rwanda. Indeed, Italy has done a deal with Albania, and there's nothing to stop the UK and France from doing a similar deal. We must look at all options that can work, because it is only when migrants and the people smugglers alike know that they cannot succeed through this cross-channel route that this small boats crisis will finally come to an end. Now, we should not stop there, because we need to modernise asylum as well. Asylum and the Refugee Convention were created in a very different time. It must be recognised that there is now movement of very large numbers of people on journeys that are all too often incredibly dangerous. That needs to be addressed not just by the UK, but by the West as a whole. A reformed international law would seek to keep people displaced by conflict close to their homes so that they can return and rebuild when conflict ends. These changes would help control migration, prevent dangerous journeys, save lives, and keep safe vulnerable people who are impacted by wars and other circumstances in their homelands. This is a case I have been making for a long time, that the government should start international discussions about a new global migration settlement, because the whole House knows that this is not just a concern for our country, but across Europe as a whole. It is vital that we must stop these dangerous journeys, that globally the UK should build on our incredible record of providing places of safety close to conflict zones. That is the way to protect people, to save lives, and to help them rebuild their homelands when conflict ends. It would also cut crime by tackling the global illegal people smuggling criminal networks, ruthless criminal gangs which, according to the National Crime Agency, fuel other serious and organised crimes from their vast profits. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have stood on the White Cliffs of Dover with Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the current Prime Minister. I want to stop the boats. But I am gravely concerned that today's bill in its current form won't do what the government wants. The House might reflect that when the immediately former Home Secretary, the former Immigration Minister, and the member for the constituency most directly affected by this crisis, among many others, all say that this bill may not work, may not deliver what the government is saying that it will, that those concerns ought to be heeded. I sincerely hope that whatever happens in voting today, the government will consider both operational and diplomatic ways forward, as I and others have been making the case for. These could so much more quickly deliver the results in the coming months that we all wish to see.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This is a new low even for this Tory government. This bill is spawned by over-promising on immigration for over many, many years by the Conservatives. It's constantly seeking to hoodwink people into believing that they are actually competent enough to deal with this situation. But on the balance of evidence, the courts have decided that Rwanda is not a safe country for them to send people who are seeking asylum. And the government stamps its feet and brings legislation here so that it can legislate to say that something that is wrong is right. And that is a new low that I've not experienced in all my years that I've been in here. And it's a slippery slope. When government takes that sort of power to itself, where will it stop? And some of the speeches that have been made on their own benches have raised that question. Now, I understand it that there is at least 5 different, I think they're called families over there on the Conservative benches, who all disagree with one another. I think it's 7. They've got their own sort of private version of the gangs of New York going on. But I think we're going to have a general election soon, because they're going to run out of backs in which to put their respective knives. But this is the 3rd piece of legislation that we've had in just 2 years. And each time the Conservatives have told us that this is going to stop the boats. We had the Nationality and Borders Act in 2022. We've now got the Illegal Immigration Act, which is, again, we were told was going to stop the boats. And now we've got this Safety of Rwanda Asylum, which is going to stop the boats. And I have to say, I'm really impressed with the Rwanda and the stand that they've taken, because without taking a single refugee or asylum seeker, they've managed to up the ante by 3-fold. They were given 140 million to even get to the table and talk about it, and now we're told it's up to 400 million and still growing, and they haven't taken a single asylum seeker. That's an incredible feat by the government. But not just that. It's only going to be 100 or maybe possibly 200 places per year. 200 places per year. So this is going to cost, what, £2 million per person on current figures? That's an incredible achievement by the Rwandan government. I can't understand why the benches obviously aren't arguing about why the numbers are so low. They're arguing about people being able to take their cases to court, individual cases to court, but they don't seem to be concerned about the fact that this is such a small number that it's hardly likely to be much of a deterrent when so few people will actually be sent in any one year. So, yes, I will.
Gregory Campbell.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. He's waxing eloquent on the issue of Rwandans' excellence at negotiating with the government. Would you agree with me that the Rwandan authorities seem to have hoodwinked the UN as well?
Well, I won't go down that rabbit hole if the honourable member forgives me, but I think that they've done an incredible job. But furthermore, they've had to rein in the Conservatives because they've had to say, we've also got international agreements, we've also got treaties and agreements with other countries that require us to abide by international laws and conventions. And if you, UK government, don't want to abide by them, we certainly do. So they've prevented the Conservatives, saved them from themselves almost, from going too far in terms of breaching international laws and international conventions. And so I've listened with interest to the speeches over there. That gangway has never seemed so wide. It seems to be the equivalent of the Berlin Wall for the left and right of the Conservative Party. But it does seem to me, standing here, listening to the speeches, that are completely irreconcilable in terms of those that want to defend the rule of law and the rights of individuals to seek their rights to be upheld in a court and to have a right to go to that court, and those that want to take that power away. And people have made it quite clear that they're not going to vote for legislation if it doesn't satisfy their requirements. But the two requirements are completely at opposite ends to one another and totally and utterly irreconcilable. So I don't understand, I don't see how the Prime Minister is going to resolve this conundrum. I think he has managed to clearly, from the expression on his face earlier on today, he's clearly managed to cobble together a coalition to get this bill through today, and he's confident about it. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for giving way. I'm very grateful for his reflections on the Conservative Party. What are his reflections on the Labour Party's policy or absence of one?
So I hear this all the time from the Conservatives. That Labour they don't have a policy. Well, one, it would be nice if one of the policies that's been implemented by this government over the last few years actually worked. That would have been a revelation. That would have been a revelation. But what I would commend, a bit of silence over there. What I would commend the government for is the arrangement it's made with Albania. That's the sort of route we should be going down. They've stood at that dispatch box today, and we brought them the small boats crossings down by a third, and that is largely due to the agreement with Albania. And you can't dispute that. That is a fact. And so by being practical about it and dealing with things at source, you can actually resolve this problem. So dealing with the gangs and investing in dealing with the gangs, why is it so they're all laughing over there? But the fact is that the convictions for people trafficking people across the channel are down by 30%. Perhaps you should take a look at yourselves and understand why this problem is existing. It's because of the sheer incompetence of the government opposite. The net immigration figures, 160,000 people were included in those net immigration figures because you failed to deal with their asylum cases within a year, and the National Office of Statistics included them in the figures. That is just sheer incompetence of this Conservative government. Incompetence in dealing with people's claims, incompetence in dealing with the boats and the illegal operations that are running those boats. It's the fault of the Conservative government from beginning to end, and this Rwanda scheme is doomed to fail. And it's just because of the rhetoric of the Conservative Party that have overpromised brought us to this point where we're having to legislate that black is white and that the Tories can have their own facts.
Jackie Doyle-Price.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. This Rwanda policy is just one tool in a suite of tools which is designed to deal with stopping the boats and, more importantly, to break the criminal gangs that profit from the hope of people who just want to have a better life. Now, last week, Essex Police secured the conviction of an 11th person following the smuggling of the 39 Vietnamese who perished in my, who were found perished in my constituency. That is on top of 18 people convicted in France as part of the same smuggling operation. 29 people have been convicted of trafficking as a result of that investigation. It proves that we can break those criminal gangs if we target our resource to them. And they're the real villains of this piece. They're the people that we should be focusing on. Now, I'm happy to support this bill tonight. I've never been an enthusiastic supporter of the Rwanda policy, but I recognise that we do need a whole suite of tools with which to stop this trade, and anything which would provide a deterrence is obviously something that's welcome. But I do think we have to be realistic. You know, if someone is prepared to get into a rickety inflatable boat to get across the channel, they're going to take considerable risk, and it will only ever be a small part of this. By far the most important ingredient we have are the returns agreements. I'm glad to see that the government are still putting these front and centre of all its efforts. But that's why I really question how we've got into this ridiculous place this week where these benchers are all falling out with each other over a small element of a bigger policy. It's completely stupid. The only people who benefit are the benchers opposite. For those people who are prepared to give them a victory tonight, well, good luck to you. That's great. But some of us are actually more intent on delivering the outcome, which is stopping the boats and breaking the criminal gangs who profit from other people's misery. So I hope that everybody really reflects on what they're going to do tonight. We should never let the best be the enemy of the good. Politics is the art of the possible. We pass this bill tonight. We are that bit closer to really tackling this problem. We don't, then actually we look a laughing stock because we've marched everyone up to the top of the hill only to back down again. So I just implore my colleagues, you may not feel it totally matches your ideology when you walk into that lobby, but this is actually going one step closer to delivering the outcome that we want, which is to save people's lives and make sure fewer people die crossing that channel.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I first of all say that the objective of this bill is supported by our party and should be supported by all reasonable people across the United Kingdom. The issue of illegal immigration and the impact which it has had on communities across the United Kingdom, whether that's in terms of the pressure it puts on schools, the health service, housing, other public services, crime, and also, of course, the rewards which it gives to criminal gangs, means that there is a duty on this government to address this issue. The question is, does this bill actually do that? And we have heard many speeches here today, some people saying about the inadequacies, some people saying how important it is, and others saying, well, it's only really a political ploy anyway. The truth of the matter is, and I think that we have already seen similar bills being brought to this House, and despite bills of a similar nature being brought and Rwanda being talked about, we have sent ministers and money but no migrants to Rwanda, because we have not learnt from the flaws in the previous bills. And the flaws that were in the previous bills still exist in this bill. They exist because the government is trying to get this balance between the lawyers who sit in that corner there and lecture us all about comedy and responsibility and using powers responsibly. If they were using powers responsibly, the first thing they would do is live up to their manifesto commitment to deal with this problem. And secondly, pay heed to the people who are negatively impacted by illegal immigration. It's fine to talk in grand terms about the legal procedures and give us lectures on comedy and the balance between Parliament and the courts and everything else. That doesn't rank too much with people who can't get their youngsters into a school, or people who can't get the health service support to which they require, or find that wages locally are being driven down, or house rents are being pushed up. And for that reason, I think that the government has got a bill which, while it has a fine aim, it does not meet the requirements of the objectives to reach the objectives which it mentions. The one part which has been missing in all of this debate today is the impact which this bill is likely to have on Northern Ireland. Because Northern Ireland is different. This House voted to leave Northern Ireland under the control of the European Union in the Windsor Framework, the Northern Ireland Protocol, and of course we are under the remit of the European Court of Human Rights as a result of the Belfast Agreement, which the government, of course, is happy to change when it suits them, but then says it can't change when it doesn't suit them. And the fact of the matter is, this bill does not deal with the issues which need to be dealt with if we're to attack the arguments, the legal arguments, which illegal immigrants use to stay in the United Kingdom.
I
will give way, yes.
The member in 2016 on a BBC Spotlight, a constituent said to him that they were seeking to get the ethnics out, and the member appears to have said, "You're dead right." Is that why the member is so supportive of this bill?
No. Well, first of all, it was inaccurate. I did not say that. But secondly, this is all about the United Kingdom safeguarding its own borders and dealing with the kind of issues which actually in Belfast are having to be dealt with. Because despite what people may think, and despite what the Minister said in the dispatch box, Northern Ireland is greatly impacted by this. Belfast is the second city of the United Kingdom when it comes to the number of immigrants per head of population being housed, and it's causing all kinds of problems. So if the member wishes to ignore the concerns of her constituents, that's fine. I want to address them. But as it stands at present, the Charter for Fundamental Rights, Article 2.1, applies in Northern Ireland. And that has been used, and it's been recently judged by the High Court, that that is grounds for people who wish to remain in the United Kingdom after entering illegally to bring a case. Now, there have been certain aspects of European law which have been removed in this bill. That is one area which has not been. So we find that, first of all, without the change in the Charter of Fundamental Rights, Northern Ireland will be a gateway. All of the arguments which the government is hoping to disapply will be able to apply in Northern Ireland. The second thing is, of course, the European Court of Human Rights is embedded in the Good Friday Agreement, or the Belfast Agreement. That has not been dealt with. So all of the arguments used under the European Court of Human Rights will be able to apply in Northern Ireland, and the European Court of Justice will be able to make a judgment as to whether or not the requirements of the European Court of Human Rights and the Charter of Fundamental Rights are being applied when people make their case. What is the impact of that going to be? Well, the first thing is this. It is going to make Northern Ireland a magnet for people who may find that the route to stay in the United Kingdom is blocked. But in Northern Ireland, of course it won't be, because we will still be under EU immigration rules, and the European Court of Justice can make a judgment. The second thing is this: if those people decide they don't want to remain in Northern Ireland, then of course, with the free movement from Northern Ireland to the rest of the United Kingdom, and indeed with the common travel area, they can move into the rest of the United Kingdom. The implication, of course, is if that becomes a large number of people, are we then going to have people barriers between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom? These are issues which I believe either have not been even considered by the Minister or have been willfully neglected, and for that reason we cannot give support to this bill.
Sir Edward Lane.
As usual, the Honourable Member for East Antrim talks a lot of good sense. Yes. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm uniquely badly affected in my constituency because of our inability to control illegal migration. The government wants to put 2,000 illegal migrants into RAF Scampton, which we simply can't cope with locally in terms of our social services, and would probably atrophy £300 million worth of investment. So my constituents are not really focused on whether we have Rwanda or not Rwanda. They just want the boats to be stopped, or at least to be severely mitigated. And we've heard many criticisms and good knockabout stuff from the opposition, but the only solution that anybody in the world has come up with to stop illegal migration is either with pushback, which I agree in the Channel is uniquely difficult, or offshoring, and nothing works. And therefore, we have to do something. The world is in such a perilous and parlous state that there is no end to the misery and the number of people who want to come here. I hear that we should speed up asylum applications, all very well, but the more you speed them up, the more people will come. I hear that we should do more on the beaches of France. I understand that. I don't understand why the French can't do more, but that's not going to stop them. The only thing that will work is what the government is trying to do. And it's so unfair. This morning, I mentioned the case of Mara Shabazz, a girl who was raped and abducted in Pakistan, still waiting to get here, a genuine asylum seeker. So many genuine asylum seekers can't get here because illegal migrants are abusing the system. There's nothing wrong with them individually. They're all nice young men. They just want to get a job. But if somebody comes and breaks into your house and decides to steal your stuff, the police turn up and they remove them and arrest them. But we are in an absurd situation where people are entering this country illegally, jumping the queue, putting their lives at risk, run by criminal gangs, and we are doing nothing about it. The public are just appalled. They can't understand what's going on. They don't understand why we're putting them in comfortable hotels or in comfortable former airmen's rooms. They don't know what's going on. They're paying for all this, and they want it to stop. Now, the Conservative Party, I hear of all these different groups. You know, a house divided is a house that's going to be destroyed. We have to work together. There's no other solution. And I hear all the different voices that are going on. I just will say that the Society of Conservative Lawyers, the Policy Exchange, not left-wing groups think this bill will work. The government thinks it will work. The ERG has some doubts. But we just have to work together to try and get this bill through, get it through Parliament as quickly as possible, get it through the Lords, and try and stop the boats. Now, we can legislate all we want to ignore the ECHR, including Rule 39, interim measures. But even if we did so, we would very soon face a final judgment from the Strasbourg Court, which everyone agrees we would be bound by. That's the legal situation. The only way we can remove the Strasbourg Court is by leaving the ECHR. And that may well happen, but the government doesn't have a mandate to do that at the moment. It can't get it through Parliament. It's a matter, I suspect, for the next manifesto. Meanwhile, this bill probably goes just about as far as we can do. I'm sorry, but that's all we can get through Parliament, and we have to be realistic. Now, as both the Society of Conservative Lawyers and Policy Exchange accept, a bill would not be workable if it did not allow for narrow claims for individual circumstances. Even the Star Chamber of ERG report seems to accept that there should be some possibility of claims in cases of bad faith. The key question is whether our system can process and dismiss these spurious claims quickly enough. Under the arrangements we have in relation to removal to Albania, illegal migrants have even wider avenues for claims, but this has still led to a 90% fall in small boats' arrival from Albania. So I do think the bill is roughly in the right ballpark, but I hope that ahead of the committee stage, the government will consider whether Clause 4 can be tightened further and whether the government can share further evidence of the ability to process and deal with spurious claims. It's a question of will. In 1939, when we were facing a sort of world war and a crisis, we overnight exported. Well, I give away very quickly, yes.
Very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. What does he think of the reciprocal arrangement for the Rwandan government to send asylum seekers to this country?
Of course, none of us like any of this, but we have to get it through the courts. We have to get it through Parliament. We have to be realistic. The Supreme Court has opined that there is a risk, I would say a vanishingly small risk, that failed asylum seekers might be sent back to Iraq or Syria, and therefore, in order to get it through Parliament, in order to get it past the Supreme Court, the government had to make this concession. We don't like it, but that's the real world. Politics is about reality, and therefore, this bill must go through. It must be dealt with as quickly as possible. And the onus on the government is now to ensure that we can speed up these cases. It would be ludicrous if many hundreds of people, illegal migrants, having come here illegally, were allowed to delay these matters for up to a year by going to a tribunal, by going to the High Court, by going to the Court of Appeal, by going to the Supreme Court. The whole thing will be bogged up, and we will look completely ridiculous as a government. The government, in order to survive and have a hope of winning this general election, has to sort this problem out. They have to deal with the problem of legal migration. We cannot have a situation where 700,000 people are pouring into this country every year. We have to pay care staff proper salaries so we can get more of our own people working. Deal with illegal migration. Deal with legal migration. And also, by the way, build some more houses for our own people. If we start working together as a party, if we stop making personal attacks on each other, if we stop questioning our good faith, then this party has a chance. Because what have they got to offer? No solutions at all. No solutions. If they get into power, they will never sort out this problem. The only hope is for this government and this party.
Kevin Jones.
There was a time not long ago that the USP of the Conservative Party was very predictable and consistent support for the rule of law, in favour of international treaties and organisations, and competency in the conduct of government. Alas, Mr Deputy Speaker, that has all changed if we hear the rhetoric from the benches opposite today, as we see a party which is increasingly going down a number of populist rabbit holes, fuelled, as we heard, by the member for Newark, who used the scaremongering and irresponsible rhetoric, which clearly is designed for his leadership bid after the election, rather than any statement of fact. We've also got a situation where the Conservative Party now see the courts and judges, not just in this country but abroad, as the enemy. We've got a situation where lawyers are like the pub bore, are seen as the enemy of the people, lefty lawyers and do-gooders. Where have we got to when we have a Conservative Party which now goes down this route? The only person we've heard from the bench opposite this afternoon who defended the rights of the court, an important part of our constitution, was the member for Bromley in Chislehurst. We also have a situation in this bill which was outlined by my honourable right honourable friend, the member for Garston and Halewood, and the member for Rwanda in clause 2, which is not about changing policy, this bill. It's about changing facts. It's about saying that Rwanda will be a safe country, and as long as we accept that and get it through a parliamentary majority through this House, that is a fact. It's a little bit like saying the black cat is white, as long as we get it through Parliament, irrespective of what the evidence tells you that the cat is actually black. And that is very dangerous, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because I think this leads to dictatorial parliamentary democracy. And we can have the facade of democracy, and it's damaged not just to our reputation, but I also agree with the right honourable member for Swindon South when he said it's all right the government party today arguing for these, but what happens if the boot is on the other foot and we have another government which put things forward that they won't like? Now, the international treaties which we pride ourselves in were born out of the destruction and ashes of the Second World War. Today, they're being defended on the battlefields of Ukraine. And it saddens me to hear the Honourable Member for Gainsborough and others wishing to just throw away these conventions. Or like the member for Devizes, who wants to pick and mix which bit of the international treaties we should actually abide by. And it is a little ironic, as the member for Rwanda said, is that Rwanda is giving a nation such as of Great Britain a lesson in international law. My right friend, the member for Knowsley, said that the government is governing in slogans. Yes, he's right, but those slogans come with a cost. £300 million of taxpayers' money already wasted, possibly another £100 million to go on a system which the Department's Home Permanent Secretary said will not work, and the money having to be signed off by ministerial order rather than by the civil servants. And is this the first try? No, my honourable friend, the member for Felton, said this is the third bite of the cherry in terms of trying to solve this problem. The member for Bournemouth West said we need to keep the faith and be straight with the public. Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we do need to be straight with the public. This bill not only won't work, it will also damage the international reputation of this country. It will also end a situation where, expectations are raised, taxpayers' money is wasted, and it needs to be ditched, and that's why I'll be voting against it tonight. I look at the spectacle of the Conservative Party tearing itself apart with interest, like we all do. But that coalition, which is a Conservative Party, which I may disagree with myself politically, I have respect for some individuals in it. What's happening now is not good, I think, for our democracy. Sadly, the tired old nag, which is this government, will only be put out of its misery when we have a general election.
Dr. Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Our country finds itself in a very difficult situation, and the government rightly made a commitment to the public that we would both stem illegal immigration and protect our borders, while upholding our moral and legal duty to offer refuge to those fleeing violence or persecution. Our efforts to stop people dying in the Channel, to stop the criminal gangs, to stop the boats, have been opposed at every turn. Opposed by the party opposite, opposed through the legal system, and of course, opposed by the criminal gangs profiting from the dangerous and illegal routes. It is claimed that this is a UK problem alone, that it's our government's problem alone, but it's in fact a problem shared with our neighbours and allies across Europe who face their own, often greater, challenges with illegal immigration. And these challenges are not going away, but instead, with the consequences of climate change and global instability, they are likely to only get worse. Our approach to asylum needs to be fair, both to the asylum seekers themselves and our communities have opened their hearts and homes to those seeking refuge, but it must be through safe and legal routes. We cannot cede control of our borders to criminal gangs. We must tackle illegal immigration. Now, the European Convention on Human Rights is often cited as the barrier preventing control of our borders. And I'm proud of the UK's leading role in promoting human rights across the globe. I want us to continue this and to support the ECHR. But the judgments of the court do appear to have moved away from simply guaranteeing the basic and fundamental rights enshrined in the treaty. Judgments have begun to infringe on democratic decision-making, and there appears no obvious way to hold the courts to account. It's been called judicial activism, but whatever you call it, the answer is not to withdraw from the ECHR or break international law. The answer is to come together again, as we did in 1949, to find the answers to the challenges of the present day. This will take time. Of course it will take time. And the government right now must take steps within its power to control illegal immigration. Now, colleagues may remember my unease over a previous bill which threatened to break international law. And I was unable to support that unamended. And had the same issues arisen here, my sentiment would be the same. But the difference here is that I've been assured that the bill as stands does not break international law. It is by no means perfect, and we could spend a lot of time seeking perfection. But the challenges we face are real and impacting on lives now. And I will therefore give my caveated support to this bill tonight as a near-term measure to tackle illegal immigration. But at the same time, I give my unwavering support to the government to engage with our international partners and work towards a long-term sustainable solution.
Bel Roberto Adi.
Deputy Speaker, public services are on the verge of collapse. The gap between rich and poor has widened and we're slipping back into a Victorian area. Food bank usage at a all-time high and workers haven't had a decent pay rise in 15 years, but we're not here to talk about that today. In fact, we're barely here to talk about those things in any meaningful way. We are here to legislate on the dog-whistle fantasist policies of the party opposite, electioneering when they should be governing, not offering any real solutions to problems and attempting to divert attention from their own failings as a government, wasting the time of this House and squandering the goodwill of the people of this country. We keep going round and round on this matter. And our Supreme Court has ruled on this. It found Rwanda to be unsafe. This was based on evidence. Legislating the opposite is not going to rid us of the facts. This is not an exercise in parliamentary sovereignty. It's actually an abuse of this Parliament's functions. It undermines the rule of law and the constitutional separation of powers. Yes, we are lawmakers and we can make and change the law, but the law cannot be used to change the facts. And another fact is that this treaty with Rwanda, coupled with the bill, actually breaches many of our obligations under international law. And if we were in doubt in any way, the government has helpfully outlined this throughout the entire bill. Clause 3, for example, excludes the applications of key sections of the Human Rights Act. It directly prevents the courts from applying the bill in a way that is compatible with convention rights. It prevents any consideration of previous rulings from the European Court of Human Rights that have found Rwanda unsafe, and it removes human rights obligations from public bodies, including courts. This bill would place an obligation on every single decision maker that has found Rwanda unsafe to simply rule it as safe. It restricts the court's ability to protect people at risk of harm, and it restricts individual legal protections. Does the government fully understand what this means? Do they see how far they have sunk? That they are so fanatic about this flawed policy that they would bar courts from considering the very reasons that Rwanda might be unsafe, stripping people of individual legal protections? From its very outset, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this bill is ridiculous. Honourable members opposite would do well to note that there is no more empire. International law is not whatever we say it is. It's comprised of agreements and treaties adopted by members of this House. To dismiss these as the rules of foreign courts is as irresponsible as it is untrue. We signed up to these solemn and binding rules, so this bill actually risks our international reputation and it makes us hypocrites. How dare we condemn other countries that do not uphold international law, and how dare we preach to them when we would undermine the rule of law? But this government doesn't really care for that. It cares more for the squabbles of its own party than our standing as a country. If this government were actually serious about resolving the issues surrounding small boats, they would actually do more to target people traffickers. They would provide safe and legal routes. People do not take these perilous journeys for fun. They are often fleeing some of the worst persecution. They are some of the most vulnerable people in the world, not the party opposite scapegoats. It's already been said today, but those who seek asylum from countries like Ukraine and Hong Kong don't have to come by unconventional means because the government has given them the ability to do so. So the government needs to stop misleading the public with its use of the word illegal, because seeking asylum in this country is not illegal. It's not against any of our laws, domestic or international, and it is the government that has exacerbated the asylum system, not the vulnerable people that are seeking asylum. And we know this because the vast majority of claims are justified. After lengthy delays, 3/4 of applications are accepted, and the longer these processes drag on, the longer refugees and asylum seekers are prevented from rebuilding their lives here in this country, working and contributing to our economy. This government has already spent hundreds of millions of pounds on a policy that is as crap as it is unworkable. And there is nothing... And there is nothing more telling than the fact that the Secretary of State has been unable to make a Section 19 statement. He could not say that this bill was compatible with the Convention on Human Rights. The Home Secretary means to take us all for fools. For the second time this year, he cannot say that his plans for removing asylum seekers to Rwanda will not break international law. The Rwandan government have been very clear. They have said they will not continue with this deal if it does not meet the highest standards of international law. This bill does not do this. This government is wasting our time. This is not going to work. And I'm not even sure it was meant to. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm sick and tired of being dragged through this House to approve legislation that does nothing to improve the lives of my constituents or uphold the values of our society. This bill should simply not be allowed to go any further. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure that when all members rush to read Hansard tomorrow, they will hear the word or read the word crass. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Crass. And I'm sure Hansard have just taken a note of that. David Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. May I draw the House's attention to my register of interests? Mr. Deputy Speaker, the starting point for the debate that we are having today has been the good work of a series of Conservative immigration ministers working closely with their counterparts in France. In particular, it's worth recalling the contribution of our late colleague James Brokenshire, who's worked with the French authorities to increase the security at the ferry terminals, the lorry parks, and in particular around the Channel Tunnel in northern France, has been, whilst enormously successful in reducing the numbers, putting their lives at risk, smuggling themselves to the UK by that route, has been instrumental in driving those gangs to use small boats across the Channel as the means of carrying on their trade. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I started out as something of a Rwanda sceptic, but having spent many years in local government and seen the cost challenges that face many of our local authorities supporting refugees and asylum seekers in the UK, it did seem to me a very expensive policy per capita. But having had the opportunity to reflect both on the visits I placed to the jungle in Calais in 2016, before the security measures were put in place, and what I've heard from our agencies, including both the French and the UK agencies operating against the gangs in France, and from some of those migrants themselves waiting to cross the Channel, it seems very clear to me that this is a policy which has, as part of the wider range of measures, great utility in acting as a deterrent. It will not by any means apply to everybody, and we know people will continue to come to the UK, including as they've done to the local authority in which I served, through the routes into Heathrow Airport. But a measure that helps address the particular unique circumstances that we face in the English Channel is absolutely essential. And it seems to me that this Rwanda policy and the bill set out today has enormous utility in addressing the risks that people are putting themselves to and the profits that those criminal gangs have continued to make. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, a great deal of the debate has focused around the detail of the legalities of this bill. And it certainly seems to me an enormous improvement in where we've been previously, and reflects the judgment of the Supreme Court in saying the key concern that needs to be satisfied is that anybody who is sent to Rwanda as a result of this policy needs to have sufficient safeguards on their human rights that we can be confident, in particular, that they would not be moved on to another country where those human rights would be abused. And that replicates the agreements that we have in respect of deportations to many other countries, and also upholds the standards that we would see from the United Nations, the European Union, from countries like Austria and Germany, which are already exploring, with Rwanda and others, similar arrangements in order to address their like concerns about the impact of high levels of uncontrolled migration across Europe and elsewhere. And I reflect on the fact that I am receiving a great deal of lobbying from leading figures in my local authorities who are enormously concerned that the cumulative cost of accommodating large numbers of people who've arrived in a fairly short space of time means that we are struggling to ensure that access to housing, access to education, access to other important public services is maintained to the standard that we would wish to. And that in that context, dealing with those who, as a number of members have highlighted, have effectively jumped the queue, rather than those who have played fair, who followed the correct process, who come here because of their connections to the UK, represents an unfair loss of public money for that purpose. And it seems to me also that whilst this bill is not perfect, set alongside the work that's been done by a number of ministers to improve decision making in the Home Office, the arrangements that have been made working with local authorities through things like the National Resettlement Scheme for refugee children, which has led to the fairly seamless now accommodation of more than double the number of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in the UK, that's seen additional local authority areas volunteering to become dispersal areas for asylum seekers and to take part in resettlement schemes compared to where we've been before. And the continued contribution that foreign students, 600,000 of whom we committed to bring to this country in our election manifesto of 2019, the contribution that they continue to make to our economy, which now represents a foreign currency earner larger than our oil and gas industry. So that demonstrates a migration and immigration policy that, in the round, continues to serve the interests of the British people. And I'd just like to finish on this question, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We've heard a great deal of criticism of the policy and challenges back, in particular, to those who aspire to form a government about what their policy would be. A key issue which I've not yet heard addressed, in the point that's made about a new unit with maybe 1,000 staff to act as a returns unit. If a negotiated agreement of this nature, with this legal basis with Rwanda, is not sufficient, then I think it is incumbent on the party opposite to answer which other countries are they seeking to negotiate those agreements with? To what extent have those agreements been reached? Because if returns agreements are the key policy that the Labour Party wishes to have as a point of difference, then it is clear at the moment that that emperor very much has no clothes.
Ms. Savile Roberts.
Let's not beat around the bush here. This bill is in retaliation. It is a crass payback, if you like, to the Supreme Court decision on the 15th of November that the government's Rwanda asylum plan was unlawful. This sets a dangerous precedent. It undermines the democratic contracts of the state while undermining what constitutes the truth. Declaring something to be true doesn't make it fact. Evidently, this bill also undermines the UK's international treaties and conventions, including, of course, the European Convention on Human Rights, with which the Home Secretary has stated that this bill may not comply. Sections 2, 3 and 6 through to 9 of the Human Rights Act 1998 are also disapplied. The UK government then acts hypocritically, requiring the Rwandan government to abide by the standards of international law while disapplying them itself. This bill does reputational damage to the UK at home and abroad. The government may say that others have set a precedent for this bill. This argument is flimsy. The UN Committee on Torture has expressed concerns about Denmark's intentions to move refugees elsewhere, and Israel, of course, abandoned its agreement to send Eritrean and Sudanese asylum seekers to Rwanda and Uganda, having been halted temporarily after legality challenges. This legislation faces a series of hurdles, each likely to bring it down. And it comes, of course, at an unforgivable price. It's reportedly cost $240 million so far, with another $50 million agreed. And then we heard from the Secretary of State that it's another $50 million, and then yet another $50 million on top. It is in no way possible to justify this in the state of cost of living crisis which we face. And no matter what the UK government believes, Rwanda has been proven not to be a safe country for those people seeking asylum. The bill fails to address key issues raised by the Supreme Court, including that of human rights issues. Refugees have historically been ill-treated after expressing criticism of the government, with new provisions such as the appeal body untested. 15 Rwandan nationals have been granted protection since 2020, with this bill excluding Rwandan nationals from its scope. How is this compatible with any definition of a safe country? And under this bill, anyone who arrives in the UK without a legitimate visa and has travelled via a safe country would be subject to removal. But what about those people fleeing conflict zones, unable to access documents such as passports and visas as embassies close down? What about the many Afghan men and women who were a crucial resource to the UK government, left stranded and in peril? Where are the safe and legal routes? This bill, of course, is an affront to Plaid Cymru's values and Wales's aim of being a true nation of sanctuary. We are proud to be on the side of equality, wanting every single person to have the same opportunities and the same access to justice, resources and services. We want to end recourse to public funds conditions and allow all migrants and people seeking asylum access to the public services they require. How this is found to be contentious by the UK government is beyond belief. Instead, of course, of electioneering and distraction policies, the government should indeed be expanding safe routes to ensure that fewer people decide to take the tortuous journey across the Channel and at the mercy of smugglers. Now, to close, Deputy Speaker, I just wanted to refer to an example, a model Professor Emyr Lewis of the Department of Law in Aberystwyth, what he uses when he is teaching public law in that university, in the way that he illustrates the legislative supremacy of the UK Parliament through an imaginary potential act. The name of this imaginary potential act? Its name is the location of Aberystwyth, open brackets, on the moon, close brackets, bill. If an MP were to sponsor this act and the government were to support it, it would become law, and no court in England or Wales could overturn it. But the reality of the location of Aberystwyth would remain utterly unchanged. When we are talking about the potential of this act to change the reality, I think we would do well to learn the lesson of Professor Emyr Lewis. Well said.
Matt Warman.
Mr. Speaker, this bill tackles an issue that is vital to many of our constituents. We all know how important numbers of legal migration and amounts of illegal migration are. I know from my own constituency, a constituency that is generous and kind, but there are real tensions when 5 hotels are used for illegal migration in a town like Skegness. There is no justification for that position, and the residents being put in it are rightly angry. When we get issues such as this wrong, we strain the social fabric of our country. And the government has a duty not just to try and tackle it, but to strain every sinew to try and tackle it. So I welcome, perhaps surprisingly even to myself, I welcome how far this bill goes. I welcome the fact that it is doing something novel. But I am uncomfortable in that position, because what this bill does is to go up to the line of international law. And international law is important, Mr. Deputy Speaker, not because of some sentimental approach about what it means, or even the fact that Britain was involved in writing some of it. It's important for two reasons to me. One, because it is the foundation upon which we are able to do the deals with other countries, for instance, Albania, France, Italy, that allow us to tackle illegal migration. Because Rwanda cannot be the only thing that we do. Rwanda has to be, if it is to happen, a part of a meaningful package of measures. And if we go so far in one direction to try and ensure that flights to Rwanda take off, we will knock out other important parts of the deal that we need to do. So we need to be very careful about walking a tightrope, because when I say that I am uncomfortable on that tightrope, I think others are uncomfortable for a very different reason. But that is what successful compromise on all sides looks like. If we try and go further, the risk is not just that we undermine our whole approach to tackling this issue with a multi-pronged approach. It also risks simply undermining Britain's whole standing in the world. So we'll have a policy that won't work and a country that is less than where we started. No one in this House, I think, wants that. And there is, to use the phrase that's been around so much recently, the simple risk that we make the perfect the enemy of the good. This has been called by people with a star chamber. We shouldn't perhaps forget that it was the very first star chamber that started the Civil War in in England. So maybe we've had enough of star chambers, but we should be alive to the fact that even the Star Chamber that has been convened so recently declared this a partial solution. And there's a danger of saying that something is a partial solution and therefore it is no good. For me, a partial solution is better than no solution. And we have to, I think tonight, grasp that nettle that says, yes, much of this is uncomfortable for many across the Conservative Party. But we should be united in our desire to tackle what is an issue that matters to all of our constituents, and we should have no shame in saying that this is a plan that we can get behind, and it contrasts so sharply with the total lack of a plan from the other side of the House. If you want to criticise the Conservative approach, and people I gather do, then it is incumbent on those people to come up with their ideas, and not simply to say we'll employ more people to do it, because the fact is this government has already employed more people to do it. Not simply to say we will try harder. The BBC accused the Labour Party of replacing a bill simply with hope. And I thought that was generous, if I was honest. But there has to be an alternative, a responsible opposition, a responsible aspirational government surely has to come up with those plans, and yet we hear nothing. So the twofold reason to get behind what we have in front of us is that it is an idea that will work in terms of making a difference to this critical problem. But it is also the only idea in town. The reason we have found ourselves in this excruciatingly difficult position is simply because it is an intractable problem. And I think in the absence of better ideas, people need to be careful what they wish for. So I will give way.
I mean, he's standing there, Mr Deputy Speaker, saying that there's no credible options, when we have heard multiple speakers and multiple organisations and lawyers say that there are credible options, create safe routes and stop making people illegal, because no one is illegal. People are human beings and they are coming here for very good reasons, coming from countries that we've happily gone and bombed and interfered in, and now we're not willing to take people in their hour of need.
I simply don't understand a line that says we're not willing to take people in their hour of need. When you look at the Ukraine scheme, you look at the Hong Kong scheme, there is huge evidence of this country of this country and dare I say it, England more than Scotland, housing those people who are in their hour of need. So I think it is right, she is right to say that safe routes are a crucial part of this problem. And I agree with her insofar as it goes, but that shouldn't be a stick to beat people with in pretending that we haven't played a huge part. The role of the UK is one that we should be immensely proud of. But, as I say, I find myself voting for this bill this evening, not with huge enthusiasm, for anything other than the concept of addressing a problem that we have a moral duty to address. And I want to end by saying that the view from a constituency such as mine, which has a long history of a complex relationship with migration, is that when politicians make promises that they don't keep, it fractures not just the social fabric, but also that vital democratic thread that gives us legitimacy when we come here. So we have a duty to tackle the issue, we have a duty to do so in a way that makes a meaningful difference, and I think we have a duty to unite behind a plan, even if we don't think it's perfect, that will make a real difference tonight. Thank you, Mr. Deputy.
Thank you very much, Florence Shalami.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Just thinking about, I attended my son's nativity play this morning. He was an angel, 6-year-old. Yeah. And just remembering the story, obviously, of baby Jesus and Mary and Joseph, and the fact of, you know, the young children were playing the knocking noise of trying to find a room, and there was no space and no room, being turned away. And I just think about what's happened to our basic decency as a country. What's happened to our compassion? Where people are fleeing, we just want to close the door on them. And I think about the fact that our public services over the last 13 years under this government have left us with a dysfunctional asylum system. The figures show that at the end of September this year, over 160,000 people were waiting for an initial decision. And we should also remember that 75% of asylum claims are granted on the initial decisions, and half of those appeals against initial appeals were allowed, doubling the amount from in 2010. And we're talking about people fleeing war, we're talking about people fleeing persecution. And they go through so much stress that I hope that none of us in this house would ever want to experience. And these are people who just want to start a new life after leaving their country of origin after such horrific circumstances. But for the vast majority of them, the welcome they get in the UK is one that waits over 6 months and running into a year. And then after that, if they're lucky, they're given just 28 days to navigate the housing system to find a job after breaking inactivity. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm proud to represent Vauxhall, a place where our diversity is celebrated, it's welcomed. People are welcomed, people from all over the country. Other communities making our community in Vauxhall stronger. And the current situation facing many people fleeing persecution is unacceptable and inhumane, and it gets worse. During their time waiting for a decision, their life is on hold. They're often stuck in unsuitable accommodation, including one of the hotels in my constituency. I'll give way to the
Wave. The last time I got off the train in Paris when I was on the Council of Europe, you walk out of the main station, the Gare du Nord in Paris, and there is a row of North African men asleep in sleeping bags outside. When was the last time she saw that at a London station? Never.
I'm not really sure what reference that has, but in terms of the Honourable Lady's statement in terms of what's happening in Paris, we've got a government who is saying that people sleeping in tents shouldn't be housed. We've got a government demonising communities. We've got a government who want to demonise those communities. And I hope we never get to that situation. But the reality is that there are a number of people living in worse conditions, in hotel accommodations, living in a room with 4 of your family members with no cooking facilities, eating really bad processed food is not a way that people should be living. And this is something that her government have failed to deal with. In terms of the government looking at this mess that they've created over the last 13 years, we're all honest, and I think we all need to agree that, yes, we do need to look at urgent action to stop the exploitative gangs that are putting so many vulnerable people into terrifying and perilous boat situations. But sadly, what we've got from the government is yet again a broken plan and no clue in how we're really going to solve and address this problem. And Mr Deputy Speaker, there are two reasons why I can't support this bill today. I think the first is going back to the simple waste of taxpayers' money towards achieving the government's goal. Under this scheme, 300 million of public money has been spent without a single asylum seeker being sent to Rwanda. That's £300 million of public money that's been spent on achieving nothing. That money could be spent in our schools, in our hospitals, or towards properly tackling down on the criminal smuggler gangs that facilitate dangerous crossings at source. But instead, we get a scheme that's failing and risk breaking our international obligations and diminishing our standing in the world. And I think that's why members should think hard about supporting this bill. Think about how much that money could do in all our respective constituencies. The UK government's own guidance on Rwanda says LGBT individuals can experience discrimination and abuse, including from local authorities. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, we must be aware of the number of refugees who flee their country of origin because of the persecution on the grounds of political repression and sexuality. My Vauxhall constituency is a proud LGBT-friendly place, and I'll always stand up to protect communities from the global persecution they face. Earlier this year at UK Black Pride, I met with African Rainbow Family, a charity that helps and supports LGBTQI people from African and BME backgrounds. And they spoke about the difficulties they've had and their members have had with navigating a Home Office system. They spoke about the long waits in terms of people waiting for their asylum claims. They spoke about the fact that they feel that continuously they're being persecuted, and that's coming from the top of this government. So we should be really worried and concerned that we are seeing a bill that wishes for us to not respect our international treaties and our obligations, but yet demonising and othering people. That should not be happening in 2023. And we see a bill that has no sign of being effective at its main aim to deter the Channel crossings. This bill pleases no one and does nothing to help solve the problems in our asylum system. Instead, we should be looking at how we can work with our international partners and our community to address some of the humanitarian crises that are the key cause of people fleeing their homes in the first instance. We should look at how we can work with those communities so people don't need to flee their homes in the first instance. We should look at how we can spend money to tackle a serious plan to crack down on the criminal gangs and clear the massive backlog in our asylum system. We've all sat on those MP surgeries raising cases, and I see the right honourable member in the front. He was very helpful when he was immigration minister, sitting down, raising those cases that have been there before I was elected 4 years ago, cases of people who are still waiting for an answer from the Home Office. That's what we should be doing. So I urge the government to withdraw this bill and look at other ways to help people.
Nick Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Doncaster is full. Now, I often get challenged, I often get challenged as a Christian when I say Doncaster is full. But I don't think it's very Christian putting people in boats that are going to, obviously, sadly, sometimes fall. I don't think it's Christian promising people a life in this country when we don't have the services for them. And I don't think it's Christian taking the best people from developing countries because we don't train our own in this country. I don't think it's Christian when my constituents are having to put up with immigration at the levels that they are. Now, we've heard the lawyers in this House speak so eloquently, as they often do, and we hear the left-wing lawyers do the same. But the lawyers in this place, at least they are probably trying to help, at least on this side of the House. Unfortunately, outside, we have left-wing lawyers making six-figure salaries, calling me awful and people like myself. We have TV pundits on seven-figure salaries, paid by my constituents through TV licences, again calling me awful. Well, I asked these people on these huge salaries, on these seven-figure salaries, I asked them to sell everything that they've got. I asked them to give it all away. Then I asked them to come and get a job in Doncaster, probably on £25,000, £30,000 a year. I asked them to find themselves a partner and then probably go and buy that dream house. Now, they buy that dream house a 3-bedroom semi and mid-terraced. They make the garden nice, the kids play in the garden. They've got a couple next door who've got kids themselves, and everything's rosy. Then all of a sudden the neighbour decides to move on, he gets a job or he moves somewhere else, and that house turned into an HMO. And then we have 9 people who don't speak English anymore, bed hopping, which is what's happening, and it's no good saying it's not happening, it's happening. And it's happening. If anyone wants to come and have a look, then please come and have a look. Because, I'm sorry, you're burying your head in your sands, trying to make yourselves look good in front of people to get votes. But this is happening, and it's happening in Doncaster, and it's happening in places throughout this country, and we are turning parts of our community into a ghetto. And this is what is happening. Now, all of a sudden, you're living next door to an HMO, and you've got comings and goings at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, people outside smoking. The grass doesn't get cut anymore, the windows don't get cleaned anymore, and unfortunately, you feel scared to let your child play out in the garden anymore. Now, there's no gated communities here to make people feel safe, because we're not on 7-figure salaries anymore. You're earning £30,000 now, remember? That's what you're earning. So the only protection that you've got is a lock on a door, and a council that might put a public space protection order in, but not enforce it anymore. Now, this is what's happening. You can't sell your house anymore, and if you do, you have to sell it at a discount. Your little child falls over in the street and you have to go to A&E, and you get a 12-hour waiting list. And the reason why the waiting list is so long is because people don't speak English in these places anymore. And this is what is happening. You then go to the schools, and the schools classes are over and oversized. And this is what's happening. Now, you can shout me down, you can say what you want, I really don't care. But this is what's happening. And we have to tackle this illegal immigration and this immigration because it is not fair. Because that couple that I'm talking about are paying their taxes week in, week out. They expect to live on nice streets. They expect to be able to have the services there for them that they pay for week in, week out. And they don't expect to be called racist or xenophobic for saying, we liked it as it was. And if we're going to have immigration, which I don't completely believe is a bad thing to do, it just needs to be controlled immigration, and that's what I was set down here to do. I'm only here because of Brexit. The people of Doncaster had had enough, and they wanted control of their borders. And unless we get control of their borders, Secretary of State, ministers, unless we get control of their borders, we will not be coming back down here. I will not be coming back down here again. And the worst thing that... And you might cheer, but the people of Doncaster are not cheering because it's the first time they've had a Conservative MP to hold the Socialist Labour Council to account, who've been left to get away with murder for the last 60 years. It is absolutely atrocious. And so, I will back this bill. I will back it today. But we've got friends on this side of the House who want this bill stronger. And I'm going to work with them. I'm hopefully going to work with you. Because we must make this work. We have to stop the boats. It's what the Prime Minister has said, and I will back him until we don't. We must stop the boats. Thank you.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I feel like I've been sucked back in time to listen to Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech again. I represent a multicultural constituency in Edinburgh South West with many immigrants, many asylum seekers, many refugees. And I can tell you that my constituents don't support this bill. I was stopped in the street by all sorts of people at the weekend telling me that they hoped I would make a speech against this bill because they find it repugnant. And the member who's just spoken perhaps needs to inform his constituents that the reason they live in the sort of conditions he describes and the reason they have such low wages is not because of immigration, but because of more than 10 years of Tory government. But anyway, Mr Deputy Speaker, what I intend to focus upon is the law, not as a lefty lawyer, but as somebody who tries to look like lawyers are bound to do, look dispassionately at the law. And if you listen to the public debate in the media anyway about this bill, you could be forgiven for thinking that the debate about the legality of the bill was confined to the competing tribes within the Conservative Party. Fortunately, it's not, and there are sources of advice independent of the government and independent of their querulous backbenchers, and it's on them that I want to focus. In particular, the Joint Committee on Human Rights, the chair this morning, published a briefing based on the independent legal advice which has been given to the committee. That's independent legal advice to the committee for the benefit of all members of Parliament and peers, and that's why it's been published. I've also had occasion to consider the briefing published by the Bingham Centre for the Rule of Law. And they're both very important, Mr Deputy Speaker, because the government are trying to position themselves as having stopped short of breaching international law. But what these briefings make clear, what these independent briefings make clear, is that the government haven't stopped short of breaching international law. The bill undermines the principles of the rule of law and the separation of powers, which are supposedly central to the British Constitution, as well as undermining various of our international obligations. And I would commend to honourable members reading the independent legal advice that's been given to the Joint Committee on Human Rights. I'm just going to take a few highlights from it. Requiring the courts to conclude that Rwanda is safe, even though the evidence has been assessed by the UK's highest courts to establish that it is not, is a remarkable thing for a piece of legislation to do. If the government were so confident that Rwanda is suddenly safe and has suddenly become safe in the last month, as I said earlier in my intervention, why pass this bill at all? Another point in the Joint Committee on Human Rights legal analysis: disapplying the Human Rights Act is very significant. If human rights protections are disapplied when they cause problems for a policy goal, they lose their fundamental and universal quality that characterises them. And this is arguably particularly the case when they are disapplied in respect of a particular group, in this case migrants who've come to the UK without prior permission. And in my own aside, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'll just remind the House that history shows that withdrawing human rights from a particular group, when a country does that, it's on a particularly slippery slope. The Joint Committee on Human Rights, our independent legal advice, also makes it very clear that, crucially, no matter what the legislation says, it can affect only domestic law. And that was the point of my intervention in the Honourable Member for Stowe much earlier this afternoon. As the Supreme Court explained only a month ago, the United Kingdom is prohibited from allowing refoulement under the Refugee Convention and the ECHR, as well as under the UN Convention Against Torture and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. All of these obligations are obligations to which we have signed up in international law. Passing this bill will not change the fact that we're signed up to those obligations in international law, and it won't change the fact that we are breaching our international legal obligations. So the members on the opposite benches, particularly the lawyers who've convinced themselves that it's okay to go through the lobbies and vote for the second reading of this bill tonight, are simply wrong. And if they look at the independent and legal advice from the JCHR and indeed from the Bingham Centre on the Rule of Law, they will see that that is the case. Yes, I will give way.
I thank my honourable friends for giving way. Isn't the fundamental part of the problem with this bill is that so many people see it as punishing the exploited and not the exploiter, and that if the government was serious about this issue, that's exactly what they would focus on?
Well, indeed, and you know, it's been suggested by a number of speakers this afternoon that no alternatives have been suggested to this bill, but alternatives have been suggested. Yeah. A serious attempt to break the model of the people smugglers. Proper international cooperation. Unfortunately, because of Brexit and because of the government's attitude towards international law, the United Kingdom's opportunities for international cooperation are becoming few and far between, because people don't trust us any longer and we don't have the same avenues for international cooperation as we used to have. Creating safe and legal routes. That's the way to do it. That's what we used to have. People who are seeking asylum are not seeking asylum illegally, but they come across the channel because they've no other way to seek asylum unless they come to the country. So create legal routes. I will in a moment, but I want to say something about how this bill impinges on Scotland. I want to make very clear that when members opposite talk about their mandate and their constituents wanting this bill, people in Scotland don't want this bill. It's not the approach that we want in Scotland. And so, therefore, it's particularly egregious that this bill seeks to oust the jurisdiction of the Scottish courts in relation to such fundamental matters as human rights and the basic tenets of our constitution. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, Scotland's system of civil justice is a devolved matter under the Scotland Act, and therefore it's the preserve of the Scottish Parliament. Yet I don't see any legislative consent motion being sought, despite the fact that the jurisdiction of the Scottish courts is being ousted. Perhaps even more importantly, historically, and it's rather important to those of us who are Scots lawyers, the authority and privileges of the Court of Session, including its inherent supervisory jurisdiction, are protected by Article 19 of the Treaty of Union. And that includes the noble officium of the Court of Session, a power that exists to give remedies where otherwise there would be no other remedy. And that's also arguably threatened by this bill. Now, I know the government's not terribly interested in Scotland, but I do wonder whether the government's applied its mind to whether there should have been a legislative consent motion here and to whether this legislation is in breach of the Treaty of Union by ousting the jurisdiction of the Scottish courts. And I see the Minister looking at his notes. I'd be particularly interested to hear him answer those points in his sum-up. Thank you.
James Daly.
Much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I think after some of the contributions I must make reference to my register of members' interest as a lawyer, as a solicitor of nearly 20 years. And the one thing that has happened on every day of my working life through those 20 years is that every lawyer I've met disagrees with every other lawyer about the issue that's in front of them. And one of the things that I can guarantee is that your advice tends to be somewhat in line with the instruction from your client and the ends that your client wants. And so some of the legal advice that has been referred to in this chamber and the sources it has come from, people may want to ponder in respect of that. I, in my time in this chamber, have been on the Justice Select Committee for 4 years. I'm on the Home Affairs Select Committee. I went with my honourable friend from Barrow, who's no longer in his place, and I will call my honourable friend from Hull over there, the chair of the Select Committee. We went to Calais on a trip, and we went on the beaches of Calais, and we spoke to people, and we saw what some may call a functioning asylum system or immigration system within France. That is not what I witnessed in the slightest. Calais is effectively a waiting room without any resources put into it, where people are directed as a waiting room to wait for a boat to come into the United Kingdom. Myself, my honourable friend, we saw that essentially the immigrants who are there are housed in tents. They are treated in the most appalling manner by the French authorities, and when the French authorities get fed up with them, they literally burn the tents down, physically attack the people who are there, and throw them onto the next area or field. So the idea that we are some outlier in terms of how we treat immigrants, the immigrants that come into our country, is for the birds. Too often in this chamber, and I think it's a point very well made by a number of my friends, is that we ignore the concerns of our own constituents to pontificate about how moral and how, shall we say, how, our sort of liberal conscience. Of course, yeah.
I thank him for giving way on that. Does he agree with me that that France is supposed to be a safe country, and people do have an option when they arrive in France or any other EU country that they can claim asylum in that first safe country? And when they actually make a decision to come over the channel, they make a decision to be illegal and get involved with criminal gangs. Nobody is forcing them to do that.
I agree with my honourable friend in respect of that, and we've heard some statements here, blanket statements regarding immigration. But one of the curious things that I found when I was speaking to people with colleagues on the beaches was that all the people seeking immigration in this country were all males, were all single, were all of a certain age frame. There were virtually no females at all in any of the situations that we got taken to. And I think that we are escaping from both what our constituents want to do and the reality of what motivates people. People said to me when I was in those camps, we think, I'm paraphrasing here, but the basic point is we think and we are told that the United Kingdom streets are laced with gold, that this is something that you are going to come in here, you're going to be provided with a lot of financial support, whether it's through benefits and other things, and that is what is motivating a vast majority of these people to come into this country. Now, in terms of the comments made by the benches opposite, you would think that nobody in the world is motivated by that to come in here. Yeah. Everyone is fleeing because they are fleeing some type of persecution. Utter nonsense. Utter nonsense. Our constituents expect us as a government, as a parliament, to put in place a suite of measures that is going to address the problem that is happening in the Channel. Yeah. This, as my honourable friend, many honourable friends have said, is one of a number of measures this government is taking. This government should be congratulated for that. Yeah. And as my honourable friend from Barrow said, nobody seems to pick this point up. The French authorities said to us when we were there that a deterrent effect, a deterrent policy, the Rwanda policy, is absolutely necessary. And we saw, and the French authorities saw, when this policy was first announced, and it was thought that when people were going and were potentially coming over the Channel, they saw a drop in cases. The spike only came when it became clear that through various legal means that this policy was not going to go forward. So not only do the French authorities think that we need a deterrent, not only are countries such as Germany, the US, Italy, Austria all saying that we need some type of policy and following the United Kingdom's lead, this is what our constituents want. We cannot have a situation where we cannot house people, where people cannot get doctor's appointments, where people can't afford a house. We can't have a situation where we have, and this may be acceptable to honourable members opposite, where we have in our prison system 10,000 foreign national offenders in our prison system. We have to take measures which reflect the will of the people, not the will of middle-class liberal consciences, which are essentially, sometimes I feel like it is more important, I think, for some to moralise than to actually be concerned about what motivates the constituents and what we should be doing in this place. In terms of the objections that I've heard to this bill, I've heard two set out, and the two ones are one in relation to Section 39 injunctions, and I would ask my honourable friend a point in respect to that, because I agree completely with my honourable friend from Devon West and Torridge. Can I ask him to comment on the government's own legal advice? Because technically, Part 39 injunctions, the government can ignore those. That is, what it states. Or my honourable friend may be able to tell me something different. But I think that's an important part of this bill, and if he could comment on that, I would be very grateful. The second part, and I'm not quite sure because I respect every single contribution that's been made on these benches, is I cannot think that anyone, and I've certainly not read any legal advice that thinks that we should exclude the right of appeal or the right of, in extreme circumstances, the right to challenge whether you are being taken to a foreign country. And there must be circumstances, even the Star Chamber advice say that there must be at least some form of allowance in respect to that. And so I think that the legal test that the government have been put in place, compelling evidence that somebody must show that there is compelling evidence they would suffer serious and immeasurable harm, is a strong test. I think it is going to address both legally and practically everything that our constituents want us to do. This is a good policy. It's a policy the government have worked hard to refine. It is within the bounds of international law. It is within the bounds of what this government has undertaken to the country, which is to tackle illegal migration and to stop boats crossing the Channel.
Yeah. 5-minute limit now. Michael Shanks.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to a priest in my constituency who recently brought to my attention the film Man for All Seasons, which I confess I'd never seen. There's a quote in it which I think is very relevant. Some men think the earth is round, others think it flat. It's a matter capable of question, but if it is flat, will the King command make it round? And if it is round, will the King's command flatten it? The proposition we have today seeks us to accept the fact that government can simply define facts as facts, even if they are not so. The attempt to bend our entire legal system to fit the will of government is a high price to pay for some meagre political cover for a party that promised to deal with a genuine issue, and I think those across the House would agree with that it is a genuine issue, and has singularly failed to do so. Now we see, and we've seen it before us in the past 5.5 hours, the Prime Minister appeasing his right flank with promises of amendments later in order to bring some people on side, and others debating the fact that those very amendments would pull them away from supporting the bill. It's a complete mess playing out before us. And what a distance this Tory party has come. Their former leader, now brought back from the wilderness, as Lord Cameron said only a decade ago, "I believe that immigration has brought significant benefits to Britain. This is our island story."